After over 10 years, Oda has finally given us a better look at Kizaru's abilities, including what you may not have realized may actually be Kizaru's awakening as a Logia Delphrid user, as supported by other high-tier Logia users have been able to use this exact same ability, the final step in the powers of a Logia, where they can allow their very element to come to life as creatures of its own. So join me as we break down the inner workings of how Kizaru's light powers work and the awakening of Logia fruits. Before we begin though, I just want to let you know that we've decided to extend the sale of my Library of Ohara Glow plushie for 1 extra week. The sale was meant to end today, but given how well it's been selling, the period has been extended for 1 extra week, so you still have time to get your order in. But act fast because it's only 1 more week, and after this period the globe will legitimately be gone forever, this time for good. So if you don't want to regret not having gotten it, be sure to order it right now. Order your very own Library of Ohara globe at the link in the description below. So starting off, Luffy manages to toss Kizaru into the ocean, but Kizaru simply flies over it. Since he's light, which can float in midair as long as it is shined, Kizaru can very much essentially just fly wherever he wants. Kizaru then fights back using an attack called Yasakani no Magatama. This is one of Kizaru's classic set of attacks which have a specific history associated behind them. This trinity of attacks involves the aforementioned Yasakani no Magatama, an attack where Kizaru shoots a torrent of flashes of light, Yata no Kagami, a move where Kizaru moves really fast by shining a mirror of light to create a road for him to move through, and Ama no Murakumo, where Kizaru creates a sword made of light. These 3 attacks are all named after the 3 imperial regalia, the national treasures of Japan. According to myth, these treasures were crafted by deities and eventually passed down the imperial line of Japan, where they still reside enshrined within the possession of the current emperor line. The treasures are forbidden from public view because of how sacred they are, and only the emperor and a select group of people are allowed to lay eyes on them, which has given these national treasures an aura of mysticism. Each of these treasures embody the 3 forces of values in Shinto belief, being benevolence, wisdom, and courage, and have become iconic in Japanese culture. The first of these 3 items is the Yasakani no Magatama. The term translates to literally 8-span jade Magatama, with a Magatama being a traditional stone from ancient Japanese culture with a lot of ties to its mythology and the mystic. The Yasakani no Magatama in specific is a sacred stone set to ward off evil that is used alongside the other treasures to bless the coronation of the Japanese emperor. The reference here could be due to the fact that Magatama literally means rounded sphere, and with his attack, Kizaru creates several small spheres of light which act like sacred jewels that smite his opponents. The second item, the Yata no Kagami, is a sacred bronze mirror that represents wisdom, literally translating to 8-span mirror due to its length. In this case, the reference is evident as Kizaru uses this mirror to shine a light to teleport around. Finally, the third item is the Ama no Murakumo, also now more commonly known as the Kusanagi no Tsurugi. The Ama no Murakumo is a sacred sword whose history runs deep into Japanese mythology, which generally translates to the clouds that gather in the heavens. Interestingly, the sword was said to have been originally found within the body of the Yamata no Orochi, the legendary 8-headed creature that inspired, of course, the powers of Shogun Orochi within One Piece. In this case, Kizaru embodies this sacred blade in the form of a sword made of light. The connection with Kizaru to these treasures is interesting, as there isn't as much apparent connection to them at first, aside from the association of the divine with light, but perhaps it could serve to symbolize Kizaru's position as a divine being who enacts the will of the gods. Putting aside the treasures, however, something really interesting happens within this chapter as Kizaru unleashes a regular Yasakani no Magatama attack, but then suddenly each of the particles of light becomes a completely individual clone of Kizaru, with each of them even being able to wield their very own Ama no Murakumo swords. Luffy is obviously confused by this as he tries to hit them, but even despite using armament and haki, these clones simply disperse into light without suffering any damage. Luffy compares them to the hollows he found earlier on the island, which of course refers to Vegapunk's holograms that were introduced at the start of the arc. No doubt at this point some sort of Chekhov's gun to help introduce the concept of Kizaru's fight, but in that case, Luffy referred to the holograms as hollows, as he does here, in reference to Perona's ghosts, the powers of the Horo Horo no Mi, the hollow fruit, which Luffy was also unable to catch back in Thriller Bark, so he's comparing them to the holograms here. we are introduced to the concept of how Atlas was able to punch the holograms with gloves that can hit light, so maybe those could help assist Luffy within this fight. However, that still doesn't explain just how was Kizaru able to form so many clones? At their core, these likely function on a similar basis as Vegapunk's holograms, but even so, it shouldn't be possible for Kizaru to so easily control so many clones at once, especially with his real body being elsewhere, and despite the fact that Luffy can't hurt the clones are able to hurt Luffy directly. So how does this exactly work? Well, there have been many theories across the years about how Logia Awakenings work. Whereas Paramecia users are able to affect their environment's surroundings, and Zoan users attain transformations, we still don't have an official confirmation on how Logia Awakenings work. Some believe that perhaps they change the weather and environment around them, with a common example being what happened at Pang Hazard, maybe Aokiji and Akainu both awakening and causing a change in the weather, but personally I disagree with that belief since I feel it's too similar to Paramecia Awakenings, and we've seen just how much different types of awakenings differ one from another. Rather, there's another theory I've had for a long time regarding Logia Awakenings that perfectly explains how Kizaru would have been able to execute this attack. I'm of the belief that Logia Awakenings allow the user to make their element come to life on its own, to turn their element into living creatures that can move, talk, and act on their own based on the will of the original user. And the perfect example of this is Karasu, who has the Susususunomi, the seemingly Logia Suit fruit that lets Karasu transform into the element of Suit. Karasu can shift freely into Suit in that form, but the Suit he transforms into also manages to take the form of actual living crows. These crows are very much alive, being able to move, make noise, and even talk with Karasu's voice. However, they don't have eyes or any distinguishing features because they are all pitch black, as they are all literally just made of Suit. We've seen similar cases with other characters as well, particularly the Admirals. Aokiji was able to create a giant pheasant out of ice in his Ice Block Peasant Bake attack, and Akainu was able to create a giant magma dog in his Inugami Guren attack, literally meaning biting dog, both which behaved on their own. So it makes sense that Kizaru as well would be able to use this ability. Enel also similarly created a few creatures made of thunder, such as the Jambul, Kitten, and Hino attacks. These living creatures aren't just attacks shaped like an animal, but living beings that behave on their own, even speaking on behalf of the original or moving and dodging attacks, as we see here with Kizaru where his clones can even name the attacks as well, like the Ama no Murakumo. It's possible that perhaps this is simply a natural ability of all Logia users rather than an awakened power, but given how we've only seen the most expert of Logia users using this type of attacks, with many of its weaker users never being able to use them or trying to in any way, it's not a ridiculous assumption to believe that this could be the ultimate stage of Logia Awakening. In the case of someone as powerful as Kizaru, his supposed awakening can be pushed to its biggest extent by allowing him to create countless clones that fight on his behalf, pursuing and hunting down Luffy, and yet even if they are defeated, these clones are just but particles of light, making it impossible to seriously harm them and making them very easily expendable soldiers, much like Karasu's crows for example. Hopefully, however, Oda can shine more details about the inner workings of this ability soon enough and confirm if it's really an awakening or not. While we are at it, though, I also wanted to mention something interesting that Vegapunk mentions within this chapter. He says that he doesn't want to let a little girl like Bonney get killed, and even blames Frankie for not being a responsible adult and letting a kid get harmed like that. Even Saturn referred to Bonney as a little girl, and last chapter, Kizaru sarcastically remarked that kids sure grow fast. This is something that I've been saying for a while, but what if Bonney actually is a kid? Not just a young woman, but an actual little kid. What if the flashback we saw of her and Kuma wasn't from many years ago, but just a few years ago before Kuma was fully turned while he was working with Vegapunk? You see, given Bonney's fruit, there is no guarantee that her current age is her real age. When giving out the ages of the supernova in an SPS, Oda mentioned that pre-timeskip Bonney was biologically 22 years old, but remark how this was only her current biological appearance. Given how Bonney can shift around her age, Oda implied that she isn't really 22 years old, and it's totally possible that her kid self could be her actual current appearance. This would explain why she's often childish and tends to resort to temper tantrums, because she's someone still being forced to grow up and reacts like a child. This could even be why, when in contact with water, Bonney was a little kid, as perhaps the water forces her to revert back to her original state. Water doesn't always nullify dull fruit properties, such as Luffy still being made of rubber underwater, but it does in the case of some other powers like the Kage Kage no Mi or the Hopi Hopi no Mi or some others, so ultimately it's totally possible that water could revert Bonney back to a younger age. This does bring into question as to why sea stone cuffs didn't revert Bonney, but maybe it's also possible that the ones that Blackbeard used were just regular iron cuffs, as Bonney needs to touch her targets to age them, so just cuffing her would have been enough for Blackbeard to stop her. But regardless, once again, I'm sure we'll find out very soon enough. Regardless, as the punks head down to rescue Bonney, they use their authority to reverse the orders on the Pacifista. This should put them at an advantage, as even if some of the punks are defeated, the other ones still being conscious should hopefully still allow the orders to remain, but of course, no one could account for the fact that none other of one of the 5 elders is on the island, and will now be forced to make their move. If the belief that the 5 elder planets are all from the Void Century, then we could be at a point where 3 key figures from the Void Century, Saturn, the Iron Giant, and Joy Boy, are about to meet each other for the first time in 800 years.